He used to watch her speeches on a cracked phone screen in West Hollow and believe she was proof that someone like him could make it out. So when Malachi Reed finally stood in the same room as Dr. Alessandra Vance, his idol, a black tech billionaire who claimed to uplift kids like him, he expected opportunity. Instead, she shamed him in front of the entire country. What she didn't know was that the quiet boy she dismissed had already seen something in her foundation that no one else had noticed. And once he exposed it, the world would stop asking whether he was prepared and start asking whether she ever was. Dr. Alessandra Vance did not simply build a company, she engineered a symbol. In Atlanta's expanding tech corridor, her name carried the weight of precision, discipline, and immaculate control. Vance Technologies, the artificial intelligence firm she founded 15 years earlier, had grown from a modest startup into a billion-dollar powerhouse supplying predictive infrastructure software to municipalities across the United States. Financial networks admired her. Business magazines framed her as the embodiment of black excellence in corporate America. Universities invited her to speak about grit and inevitability. She was not merely wealthy, she was curated. Everything about Alessandra was intentional. Her posture communicated certainty. Her wardrobe communicated authority. Her philanthropy communicated responsibility. The Vance Future Initiative, her flagship foundation, claimed to elevate underprivileged urban youth through scholarships and technology immersion programs. Its marketing materials featured polished images of smiling teenagers in robotics labs, crisp slogans about accountability, and Alessandra standing at the center like a lighthouse of achievement. The foundation's slogan, "Rise by Design," echoed her personal doctrine. Poverty was not a condition, it was a mindset. To her, struggle was evidence of poor calibration. Output determined value. Presentation reflected discipline. Excuses were luxuries she believed she had never afforded herself. The annual Vance Future Scholars Summit was her most visible display of that philosophy. Hosted in a gleaming downtown convention center, the event was designed as both inspiration and spectacle. Multiple camera rigs were positioned along the stage perimeter. A livestream banner rotated sponsor logos across massive LED panels. Influencers occupied reserved seating. Local politicians waited backstage for photo opportunities. Alessandra understood optics the way engineers understood circuitry. Every angle had to amplify strength. As she stood at the podium beneath sharp white lights, the crowd watched a woman who appeared immune to doubt. Her speech emphasized resilience and preparation. She spoke of discipline as liberation and accountability as love. The applause rose in synchronized waves. Online viewers surged past 50,000 within minutes. Then the doors at the back of the hall opened. Two teenage boys entered quietly, escorted by a volunteer who appeared flustered. Malachi Reed moved with restrained composure, his thrift store blazer slightly oversized at the shoulders. Jalen Cross walked beside him, his sneakers worn thin at the edges. Their names were listed among the scholarship finalists. They had traveled across the city from West Hollow after a delayed bus transfer. Cameras captured their late entrance in real time. Alessandra paused mid-sentence, her gaze sharpened. The delay, however small, disrupted the choreography. When she addressed them, her voice carried across the hall with polished firmness. She referenced preparation. She questioned readiness. She implied that punctuality was the simplest form of respect. The words were measured, but their implication was unmistakable. Discipline separates those who rise from those who remain. The boys did not respond. They took their seats without protest. Online viewership spiked as clips were immediately isolated and reposted. Comment streams accelerated. From the main stage camera, the moment appeared instructional. From a secondary side angle, however, something else flickered briefly across the screen, a detail subtle enough to escape immediate notice. By the time the applause resumed, the seed of collapse had already been planted. By midnight, the clip no longer belonged to the summit. It belonged to the internet. Within hours, short fragments of the exchange were circulating across every major platform, edited into tight, dramatic loops that stripped away context and amplified tone. Hashtags surged into national trending lists. Commentators framed the moment as either disciplined mentorship or public class shaming. The split was immediate and volatile. Some praised Dr. Alessandra Vance for reinforcing standards. Others accused her of betraying the very communities her foundation claimed to uplift. The original livestream replay was dissected frame by frame. Viewers slowed the footage to examine her expression when the boys entered. Analysts zoomed in on Malachi Reed's posture as he adjusted his sleeves and took his seat without resistance. They paused on Jalen Cross's steady gaze toward the stage, his jaw set but controlled. In high definition, restraint became visible. So did discomfort. A second-angle camera, uploaded by an independent blogger, revealed something subtle that the main broadcast had missed: a fleeting curve at the corner of Alessandra's mouth, a smirk so brief it might have been interpreted as composure. Yet online it hardened into evidence. Malachi returned to West Hollow that night to a cramped apartment where his younger siblings were finishing homework at the kitchen table. He said little about the event. He had been selected for a STEM micro grant because of his aptitude for engineering design, not because of presentation. His silence was deliberate. He understood that attention could either ignite opportunity or incinerate it. Jalen, more strategic by nature, monitored the reaction closely before deactivating his social accounts. He had spent years mapping a path out of poverty through structure and law, not controversy. Both boys knew that being reduced to a viral symbol could distort their ambitions. Meanwhile, Alessandra moved quickly to control the narrative. Morning interviews framed her comments as constructive accountability. She emphasized punctuality as preparation and preparation as respect. She declined to apologize, asserting that leadership required clarity rather than softness. Her supporters amplified her message, labeling criticism as oversensitivity. The language of accountability culture replaced the language of empathy. In West Hollow, Malachi's grandmother watched the replay alone. The television volume was low. Her expression did not shift as the words repeated, but something in her stillness suggested recognition rather than shock. She had lived long enough to understand how public dignity could be quietly dismantled. Late the next afternoon, as commentary cycles began to plateau, a digital media analyst posted a thread noting irregularities in the live stream's metadata. Certain timestamps appeared altered. Camera switches seemed pre-programmed in unusual patterns. The observation was technical, almost overlooked, until a former Vance Enterprises employee reposted it with a single sentence beneath. "The real story isn't about the boys." The comment did not trend immediately. It lingered, understated yet magnetic, hinting at a layer beneath the outrage. Within minutes, direct messages began filling the analyst's inbox, each one promising fragments of something larger that had not yet surfaced. The outrage surrounding the summit did not fade, it evolved. What began as commentary about tone shifted into scrutiny of structure. Independent bloggers and financial watchdog accounts redirected attention toward the Vance Future Initiative itself. Public tax filings were downloaded and reposted. Donation charts were converted into simplified graphics for mass consumption. As the numbers circulated, questions sharpened. Administrative expenses appeared disproportionately high compared to direct student funding. Marketing allocations rivaled scholarship distributions. The foundation's annual gala budget exceeded the combined micro grants awarded to several neighborhoods. Rowan Mercer noticed the shift before most mainstream outlets did. Known for dismantling corporate facades with patient precision, Rowan approached controversy differently than viral commentators. He did not chase outrage, he tracked patterns. Raised in West Hollow, he recognized the texture of dismissal when he saw it. He remembered evenings when food supplies were measured carefully to last until payday. He remembered teachers who praised polish over potential. Watching Malachi and Jalen remain silent under public correction felt less like news and more like repetition. Within days, Rowan began cross-referencing the Foundation's publicly available documents with procurement databases and vendor filings. The discrepancies were not explosive, but they were persistent. Scholarships appeared clustered among applicants whose promotional photos aligned seamlessly with the brand's aesthetic. Testimonials featured articulate, media-ready recipients. Meanwhile, neighborhoods with the highest poverty rates showed minimal representation. The imbalance suggested curation rather than randomness. Then the anonymous messages began. Rowan's encrypted inbox received a compressed folder containing audit trails, internal memos, and time-stamped email threads. The correspondence revealed strategic conversations about optics and narrative control. Certain applicants were described as high-visibility assets. Others were categorized as lacking presentation readiness. One internal slide deck, photographed during a boardroom meeting, contained language that framed low-income applicants as reputational risks. The tone was not violent, but it was clinical and dismissive. As Rowan examined the documents, Malachi refused every interview request extended to him. His silence signaled intention rather than fear. Jalen, meanwhile, began cataloging inconsistencies he observed in the scholarship agreement they had signed. Buried within the legal text was a clause granting the Foundation perpetual media rights over recipients' leaknesses and personal stories. Participation in the program effectively transferred narrative ownership. The discovery reframed the summit incident as more than public embarrassment. It suggested infrastructure designed for image management, Rowan Cross checked the clause against previous recipients' experiences. Several former scholars confirmed that promotional appearances were mandatory. Declining interviews resulted in reduced funding opportunities. The pattern reinforced the suspicion that brand coherence outweighed equitable impact. Late one evening, while reviewing archived property records connected to Foundation board members, Rowan encountered a detail that shifted the investigation from institutional to personal. Public housing documents listed an address in West Hollow tied to Alessandra Vance's family nearly 3 decades earlier. Further digging revealed a sudden relocation under ambiguous circumstances, followed by a complete omission of that history in her official biography. The discovery complicated the narrative. Alessandra had not merely observed poverty from a distance, she had emerged from it. Yet her public persona erased that origin. Rowan leaned back from his screen, recognizing that the story was no longer about a viral clip or uneven bookkeeping. It was about departure, reinvention, and something unresolved. What he did not yet know was why she had left, and who had paid the price when she did. While headlines debated accountability and betrayal, Malachi Reed returned to routine with disciplined restraint. He stocked shelves during early morning shifts at a grocery warehouse, before attending community college classes in the afternoon. Evenings were reserved for helping his younger siblings with homework, his presence steady and uncomplaining. He understood that visibility could distort ambition, so he chose structure over spectacle. The viral clip had attempted to define him, but he refused to let humiliation rewrite his trajectory. Jalen Cross responded differently but with equal focus. He converted frustration into calculation. Long after West Hollow's streetlights dimmed, he sat at a refurbished laptop assembling lines of code for a prototype he and Malachi had quietly discussed months before the summit. The idea was simple but scalable, an educational platform that paired students in underserved neighborhoods with localized mentorship data and scholarship transparency tools. It was not designed for applause, it was designed for access. Rather than leaning into sympathy interviews, they redirected inquiries toward the project. Their refusal to perform wounded dignity unsettled commentators who expected emotional breakdowns. The contrast between them and Alessandra Vance sharpened with each passing day. While her legal and media teams strategized containment, the boys documented inefficiencies within the scholarship system and published anonymized findings through independent channels. Their tone remained measured, almost clinical. Former teachers began endorsing their work publicly, describing Malachi's disciplined curiosity and Jalen's strategic foresight. Donations trickled in at first, then accelerated after a respected Atlanta educator shared their crowdfunding page. West Hollow, once depicted as a backdrop for struggle, mobilized with cautious pride. Community centers offered meeting space. Local business owners contributed modest funds. Parents volunteered administrative support. The narrative slowly shifted from embarrassment to collective resilience. The same neighborhood that had been indirectly labeled unprepared began demonstrating organization and initiative. For many residents, supporting the boys became symbolic reclamation. They were no longer passive recipients of philanthropy. They were architects of their own infrastructure. The shift did not go unnoticed inside Vance Enterprises. Within a week, formal cease and desist letters arrived citing defamation and unauthorized use of Foundation-related information. The language was polished but firm, warning of potential legal consequences if public commentary continued. The pressure was strategic rather than aggressive, designed to exhaust rather than confront. Advisors quietly suggested that accepting a settlement could secure financial stability and protect future academic opportunities. The offer was framed as pragmatic closure. Malachi weighed responsibility to his family against principle. Jalen evaluated risk models late into the night, calculating potential fallout. Accepting the settlement would silence scrutiny but guarantee security. Continuing would preserve integrity but invite prolonged uncertainty. Their choice would determine whether the narrative remained about offense or evolved into reform. As Jalen archived older conference footage while researching Foundation history, he discovered a decade-old recording of Alessandra's first major public address. In it, her language about community access and systemic barriers sounded radically different from her current rhetoric. The contradiction was not subtle, it was foundational. He replayed the clip twice, recognizing that this discovery could fracture the narrative beyond repair. The first fracture appeared in the boardroom, not online. Alessandra Vance sat at the head of a polished walnut table as quarterly projections glowed across a silent screen. The numbers were not catastrophic, but they were unsettled. Minor stock fluctuations had begun to mirror public uncertainty. Sponsors who once renewed contracts automatically now requested clarification calls. Strategic partners asked careful questions about brand stability. No one accused her directly, yet the undertone was unmistakable. Leadership required insulation from controversy, not ignition of it. Cable news panels debated the language of class elitism with her name displayed beneath scrolling headlines. Commentators analyzed her summit remarks in slow motion, isolating tone and posture. Corporate peers who had once praised her discipline now avoided overt endorsements. Alessandra maintained composure in public appearances, but privately the precision she relied upon felt less certain. Control had always been her advantage. Now, control seemed porous. The pressure triggered memories she had long compartmentalized. West Hollow resurfaced not as a statistic but as a street lined with aging duplexes and unreliable heat. She remembered standing in a high school auditorium years earlier, her thrift store blazer pressed carefully, presenting a science project before classmates who whispered about her address. A teacher had corrected her pronunciation publicly, the laughter subtle but cutting. That moment etched itself into her discipline. She had interpreted humiliation as evidence that softness invited erosion. From that day forward, she resolved never to appear unprepared, never to invite dismissal, never to be reduced to circumstance. Survival shaped her ascent. Scholarships were secured through relentless performance. Internships were navigated with strategic restraint. She cultivated image because image opened doors that talent alone did not. Yet somewhere along the climb, survival hardened into ideology. Poverty became something to outgrow rather than understand. Struggle transformed from shared memory into disqualifying flaw. Her success was constructed as proof that obstacles could be conquered through will, and acknowledging systemic barriers felt like undermining her own narrative. Rowan Mercer's preliminary findings complicated that narrative further. His report did not accuse her of criminality, it questioned prioritization. Charts displayed disproportionate administrative spending. Anonymous alumni described pressure to conform to brand-friendly aesthetics. The contract clause regarding media rights circulated widely, reframing the foundation as curatorial rather than liberatory. Public discourse shifted from tone to structure. Transparency was demanded not through outrage but through documentation. As alumni testimonies accumulated, Alessandra prepared for a nationally televised response intended to stabilize perception. Her communications team crafted language emphasizing growth, recalibration, and mission alignment. The studio lights would be unforgiving, but she had mastered environments more hostile than this. The strategy was simple: acknowledge minor missteps, reaffirm commitment, redirect focus toward impact metrics. Backstage, moments before the broadcast began, her phone vibrated with a private message from Malachi Reed. The preview line was brief and unexpectedly restrained. It did not threaten exposure or demand apology. It contained a link. As the countdown to live transmission echoed through the studio, Alessandra hesitated, recognizing that whatever waited behind that link might not be controllable. The studio lights were sharper than usual, designed to eliminate shadow and expose nuance. Alessandra Vance entered the broadcast composed but guarded, her posture rigid with controlled resolve. The anchor's introduction framed the controversy as a debate over leadership philosophy, yet the undercurrent was unmistakable. Millions were watching not for clarification, but for fracture. Across the country, living rooms, office break rooms, and college dormitories streamed the segment live. Comment sections surged before she spoke her first sentence. She began defensively, articulating standards and discipline with the same calibrated authority that had built her empire. She referenced preparation, opportunity, and the necessity of accountability. Her tone was steady, but the sharpness that once signaled confidence now felt brittle. Online reactions split instantly, trending phrases oscillating between resilience and arrogance. The nation appeared divided in real time. Midway through the interview, Alessandra shifted strategy. She acknowledged that her remarks at the summit could have been perceived as lacking empathy. She expressed regret for the setting, conceding that public correction may not have been constructive. The admission was partial, precise, carefully contained. She did not concede systemic bias. She did not apologize for her philosophy. It was recalibration without surrender. Then the equilibrium shifted. During the live broadcast, Malachi Reed released a digital packet through independent media channels. The documents were methodical rather than emotional. Scholarship eligibility spreadsheets, geographic distribution maps, internal policy summaries. The data revealed that applicants from specific ZIP codes, including large portions of West Hollow, were statistically underrepresented due to algorithmic scoring adjustments labeled as risk indicators. The classification correlated less with academic performance and more with neighborhood demographics. News producers pivoted instantly, integrating the data into the live segment. The anchor referenced the release while Alessandra remained on air. The timing was surgical. Comment streams accelerated beyond moderation capacity. Analysts began interpreting the maps in real time. The narrative no longer revolved around tone, it revolved around structural exclusion. Within minutes, two prominent sponsors issued public statements announcing temporary suspension of partnership pending internal review. Market tickers reflected hesitation. Vance Enterprises' stock dipped modestly but visibly. The board of directors released a brief acknowledgement that an emergency review session would convene within 48 hours. The power dynamic had inverted not through outrage, but through documentation. As the segment concluded, Alessandra's expression remained composed, yet calculation had replaced certainty. She recognized that the boys had not sought humiliation in return. The release of data was deliberate, measured, and strategic. It exposed architecture rather than attacking character. The restraint unsettled her more than hostility would have. Revenge would have been predictable. Reform was destabilizing. Backstage, advisors spoke urgently about containment strategies, yet Alessandra's attention lingered on a realization forming beneath the noise. Malachi and Jalen were not dismantling her to destroy her. They were dismantling the system she had defended. The distinction reframed the confrontation entirely. Before she exited the studio, her phone vibrated again. A formal request had arrived through an intermediary. It proposed a private meeting with the boys, without media, without representatives, without narrative control. For the first time since the summit, Alessandra faced a conversation she could not script. The meeting took place in a quiet conference room overlooking the Atlanta skyline, absent of cameras, branding, or legal observers. The glass walls reflected three figures seated at a modest table, the distance between them more symbolic than physical. Alessandra Vance arrived without her communications team for the first time since the controversy began. Malachi Reed and Jalen Cross entered without advisors, carrying only a slim folder of printed documents and the composure that had defined them throughout the storm. The atmosphere was restrained rather than hostile. No voices were raised. No accusations were theatrically delivered. Instead, the confrontation unfolded through measured acknowledgement. Malachi described, in steady cadence, how Alessandra's story had once shaped his ambition. Growing up in West Hollow, he had studied interviews of her early career, viewing her as evidence that systemic barriers could be navigated. Her ascent represented structure, not spectacle. To him, she had symbolized disciplined hope. The public correction at the summit did not merely embarrass him, it fractured a model he had trusted. Jalen approached the moment analytically, outlining the psychological cost of public shame within communities already conditioned to anticipate dismissal. He detailed how visibility without dignity amplifies vulnerability. The data he and Malachi had released was not engineered to dismantle her legacy, but to prevent future students from being curated into narratives that did not belong to them. His reasoning remained calm, almost academic, yet the implication carried emotional weight. Their grievance was not personal humiliation alone, it was structural exclusion masked as mentorship. As Alessandra listened, the polished certainty that had shielded her for decades began to erode. In their restraint, she recognized fragments of her younger self, the careful posture, the strategic silence, the refusal to appear undone. She saw the auditorium from her adolescence reflected in their steadiness. The humiliation she once internalized as fuel had, over time, calcified into ideology. The boy's presence did not accuse her loudly, it mirrored her history back to her with unsettling clarity. The moment of realization was quiet. No dramatic confession punctuated it. Instead, Alessandra acknowledged the necessity of an independent audit into the foundation's allocation structures. She committed to revising scholarship criteria, eliminating geographic risk scoring, and dissolving the media rights clause embedded within recipient contracts. She offered to restructure the board to include community oversight from neighborhoods like West Hollow. The proposals were substantive rather than symbolic. Yet, even as she outlined reform, the distance remained. Trust, once fractured, does not recalibrate through promises alone. Malachi's composure suggested appreciation without absolution. Jalen's measured nod signaled conditional openness, not endorsement. The power dynamic had shifted irreversibly, accountability had replaced admiration. When the meeting concluded, no photographs were taken, no statements were drafted. The silence that followed carried more gravity than any broadcast. Later that evening, the Vance Enterprises board issued a formal notice. A final vote would determine Alessandra's continuation as CEO pending review findings. For the first time in her career, her future would be decided without her controlling the narrative. The board's decision arrived on a gray morning that felt deliberately unceremonious. After days of closed-door deliberation and mounting sponsor withdrawals, Vance Enterprises announced that Dr. Alessandra Vance would step down as CEO effective immediately. The statement was structured, careful, and future-oriented. It emphasized commitment to transparency, structural reform, and renewed community oversight. Alessandra's own public message avoided defensiveness. She acknowledged institutional blind spots, endorsed the independent audit, and affirmed that leadership sometimes required relinquishment rather than retention. Markets stabilized within days. Analysts described the transition as strategic damage control. Commentators debated whether her resignation signaled accountability or inevitability. Yet outside financial districts, the meaning felt different. In West Hollow, the announcement did not produce celebration. It produced reflection. Power had shifted, but the community understood that symbolic victories required structural follow-through. True to her commitment, Alessandra transferred a substantial portion of her personal holdings into an anonymous development trust earmarked specifically for West Hollow infrastructure. The fund supported internet access expansion, local business grants, and educational resource centers managed by independent oversight committees. Her name did not appear on the filings. The gesture was deliberate in its invisibility. For the first time in her career, impact existed without branding. Meanwhile, Malachi Reed and Jalen Cross continued refining their educational technology platform. What began as a modest transparency tool evolved into a scalable system mapping scholarship access patterns nationwide. Their work attracted partnerships with universities and nonprofit coalitions focused on equitable algorithm design. They declined invitations to monetize their narrative as viral survivors. Interviews they accepted centered on systemic reform rather than personal grievance. They rejected victim branding, insisting that structural clarity mattered more than emotional spectacle. Their progress remained grounded in discipline rather than triumphalism. Malachi maintained his steady composure, balancing leadership with responsibility to his family. Jalen expanded the platform's back-end architecture, ensuring that data could not be easily manipulated by institutional bias. West Hollow's involvement persisted not as charity, but as collaboration. The neighborhood that had once been reduced to optics became an active participant in reform. From a distance, Alessandra observed the evolution with restrained acceptance. Her empire, once synonymous with certainty, now existed without her direct command. The loss of title carried weight, yet it also dissolved the armor she had worn for decades. Without constant performance, reflection surfaced. The survival instinct that had once driven her ascent no longer required contempt as reinforcement. Humanity, muted for years beneath discipline, re-emerged in quieter forms. Months later, a short video began circulating online. The footage was unpolished, captured on a handheld phone inside a modest West Hollow community center. Alessandra appeared in the background, assembling refurbished laptops alongside volunteers. There were no banners, no sponsors, no stage lighting. She moved without announcement, without choreography. The clip spread not because of outrage, but because of contrast. This time, the camera did not belong to her. If this story made you rethink what leadership really looks like, take a quiet second to support narratives that challenge power instead of protecting it. Share this with someone who believes success and accountability can exist together. Stay connected for stories that don't just expose the system, but examine the human choices inside it. And now consider this carefully. When survival turns into status, at what point does strength quietly become the very thing we once feared in others?